Are you an introvert? Well, so am I. Hear how you can bring those strengths to your speaking and leadership on this episode of the Speaking Your Brand podcast. More and more women are making an impact by starting businesses, running for office, and speaking up for what matters. With my background as a TV political analyst, entrepreneur, and speaker, I interview and coach purpose-driven women to shape their brands, grow their companies, and become recognized as influencers in their field. This is Speaking Your Brand, your place to learn how to persuasively communicate your message to your audience. Hi there, and welcome to the Speaking Your Brand podcast. I'm your host, Carol Cox, joined again today by our lead speaking coach, Diane Diaz. Hi, Diane.
Hi, Carol.
Can you believe that this is episode 400 of the Speaking Your Brand podcast, right? I mean, I don't even, if you really sit back and think about 400 individual pieces of content. I don't think I've done anything else 400 times.
That's incredible. That's astounding, actually.
And you've been obviously a part of so many of those episodes, and which has been exciting. But I really just want to thank all of you who have listened, whether you have found this podcast relatively recently or found it in the past year. And I even know there are some of you who have been listening since the very beginning. So thank you so much for being part of the Speaking Your Brand community, for listening, for sharing episodes that you really like, for emailing me when you listen to an episode that resonates with you, and for becoming clients and working with us. So this episode, we're going to be talking about why introverts make great speakers and leaders. This is the final episode in the series we've been doing all around executive speaking. Whether you're an executive at a company or you're an entrepreneur, this series has been geared around helping you to develop your executive presence, your storytelling skills as a leader, and how to effectively communicate change, whether you're communicating change to a team, an organization, or to your audience. So Diane, do you consider yourself an introvert?
100%.
Okay, as am I. And I find that so many of the women that we talk to, they tend to think being an introvert as a speaker is a disadvantage to them. And so that's what I wanted to do this episode with us, to talk about our experiences as being introverts, but as speakers, and really a lot of the strengths that introverts have that they can bring to the stage to their audiences. And so I feel like there's a common misperception that most speakers are extroverts, perhaps because we see them on stage. So we see speakers that we may classify as really charismatic or energetic or engaging. And we think that as introverts, we're not those things, but we are. We may just portray them differently. And from my very unscientific survey of all of the different women and speakers I've talked to over the years, I have found that I would say well over half of them are introverts. Have you found the same?
Absolutely. Clients say that to me all the time. And I think you're right. I think it's because when you see someone on stage, you just assume they're an extrovert. I think also a lot of the well-known speakers that we know that get paid a lot of money to do these very public events also then have social media teams. And so they're putting out all this content, which makes it seem like the person is out there a lot more, which makes them seem like an extrovert.
Yes, I agree with you that, and this is kind of one of the differences we'll talk about between being an introvert and extrovert. And there is no right or wrong. There is not one is better than the other. It's just different. So it's different how we show up as speakers. Also, what we need, how we need to take care of ourselves, especially after a speaking engagement or after attending a conference, which may look different than what extroverts do as well. And so if you're new to Speaking Your Brand, welcome. We're so glad that you are here. We work with women entrepreneurs, professionals, and leaders to develop their thought leadership message, create their signature talk, and put themselves out there as sought after speakers. Now, one of the things that has helped a lot of the women that I've talked to is to take our speaker archetype quiz, because it's fun, it's free, it's just 10 multiple choice questions. And then you'll find out which of the 4 speaker archetypes you are that we've identified. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with introversion or extroversion, because really you can be any of the 4, but it helps you to understand where your natural communication strengths are and then how to amplify them. So you can take that free quiz at speakingyourbrand.com/quiz. Now, Diane, I know that at the beginning of this year, we made a commitment to go to a lot more events than we have been because of the pandemic. Obviously, the first couple of years of the pandemic, we didn't really do much of anything. And then, like, 2022 was slow getting back out there. 2023 was slow getting back out there. And so, the beginning of this year, we're like, okay, we really need to show up locally again, get back involved in the community, which we have been very involved before the pandemic. And, I really have enjoyed going to all different types of events. I have learned which types of events feel better to me. And we'll talk about that because I think this is important as an introvert. But also, showing up at events as an introvert isn't always easy. So we'll share some tips about that as well. But before we do that, I know that, Diane, you grew up not only as an introvert, but also relatively shy as a child, as did I. And I feel like, again, for a lot of people, they feel like, well, why would you become a speaker then? Like, doesn't that seem weird that you would want attention on you? You would want people looking at you. And I think this is why people confuse introversion and speaking. Because for me, becoming a speaker, and this was all the way back with joining the debate team in high school, through the speaking that I did in college and even early in my career to today, is that what I call my life hack was to become a speaker. This way, when I was at an event, people would come up and talk to me because I had the little name badge on that said speaker. So a lot of people want to talk to the speaker, either before or after. So I didn't have to be the one to break the ice because networking situations feel very awkward and uncomfortable to me. And so I didn't like to have to go into those situations. I've gotten much better at it over the years, although I still don't love it. So Diane, number one, can you relate? And number two, why did becoming a speaker fit with you as an introvert?
Yes, no, I can 100% relate with that, Carol. And I think, I was painfully shy when I was young, painfully shy, literally scared of my own shadow and did not want to be noticed and wanted to just fly under the radar. But I will say that I did start to come out of my shell probably in my early 20s. When I was in college, I started working at a grocery store as a cashier. And so it was sort of a nice fix for my shyness because the policy of the store was that you had to talk to every customer. So it wasn't that I wanted to, it's just that I had to, right? So it kind of forced me. And then when I'm in running the cash register, someone's coming through my line, they usually initiate the conversation, which is great. I don't have to initiate it, right? So it sort of forced me to start to talk to people more and come a little bit out of my shell. I'm still an introvert. I can definitely relate to that. But then as far as speaking goes, I think that for me, speaking is a way of sharing a message without, there's a purpose to it, right? So when you're asked to speak somewhere, you're there for a reason. So you're not just randomly talking to people. You're there for a reason. People want to hear from you. They've literally asked you to come there and share. And so I feel much more comfortable in that environment. I feel comfortable on stage speaking, more comfortable there than I do actually just going to networking events. So I'd much rather be the one on the stage because, again, there's a purpose. Now, going to events, I have gotten more comfortable. Like you said, there's certain events I like. I've gotten more comfortable doing that. There are strategies for that, which I'm sure we'll get to. But I definitely think that speaking I think it's especially good for introverts because it does give you a purpose for what you're saying. And so it doesn't feel as uncomfortable as just randomly walking up to someone and starting to talk to them.
Oh, yes. I really like this idea of purpose. It also makes me think of that we feel like we have a
Yes.
role at that event. So we don't feel like we're just floating there, kind of like, okay, we're supposed to chat with people, but we don't really know why
Right.
or what they're going to, or like, why do they want to talk to us? What am I going to say to them? Like small talk, it feels awkward. So it's like, okay, we have a role, we have a purpose for being here, and we know what our role is. And I think maybe it's the undefined nature of just networking events that makes us less comfortable.
Yes. And when I'm the speaker, even if I get there ahead of time and I might be networking beforehand, it's a nice in because I can introduce myself and say, oh, I'm the speaker today. So it isn't about, necessarily what I do or having to think of something clever to say to them, or it's just a natural opener. So it feels so much more comfortable.
Yes. All right. Yeah. So for those of you listening, again, if as an introvert, just think about being a speaker gives you that role. And if you're going to an event and you're not a speaker, still go to events. Again, we'll talk about some more strategies, but maybe either volunteer for that event so that you have a role as a volunteer, as a guide, as someone who's helping to set up or to greet people. So I think also giving yourself a role either explicitly through that organization or even just in your mind and tell yourself, oh, I'm the welcome committee. And they may not know that, but if you tell yourself that, that can also help.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's just briefly talk about
Hmm.
what introversion is and what extroversion is so we kind of understand what this is. So it does not mean that you're shy if you're an introvert. Now, you could be an introvert and shy at the same time, but it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing. Oh, this reminds me. So I was just at an event recently, and it was about a half-day event. So they had a variety of speakers, and there was one guy who was speaking towards the end, and he was very warm and great message, a good speaker, like had great stories. That's what made him a great speaker, because he had good stories. And he said at one point, he's like, you know what? I'm an introvert. I'm standing here in front of you all, but I'm an introvert. And that just means that when I'm done here today, I'm going to go have some alone time so I can recharge. He said, it doesn't mean that I'm socially inept just because I'm an introvert. It just means that I need that alone time, either beforehand and afterhand. And so that's really what introversion means, is that we gain energy being by ourselves. And so we need to make sure that we're giving ourselves that space. And sometimes we find a lot of social interactions or a lot of social stimulation draining if we don't have that balance with that alone time, versus extroverts tend to gain energy from social interactions and a lot of social stimulation, and they may find being alone draining. So that's the difference there between introversion and extroversion. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we're socially inept, although sometimes I feel that way.
Same.
It depends on the event. And so the other thing that I thought was interesting about introverts, because I was doing some research for this episode, is that sometimes introverts do tend to get more performance anxiety before speaking at events than extroverts, perhaps again because of that social stimulation. So that's something to keep in mind. And so, and the other thing is that, and I think, Diane, we have found this for sure in the different presentations and talks that we've delivered over the years, and even with the way that we run our Thought Leader Academy and the client work we do, is that we really prefer deep conversations. We really prefer going in depth on topics versus kind of more superficial. We like meaningful conversations. And this is why we talk a lot about making sure you have those stories in your talks and that emotional message, and that you're going deep in your thought leadership message and not just doing the superficial. And I don't know, Diane, have you found the same just, in the work that we do with our clients as well, about this preference for deep, meaningful content?
Absolutely, because I feel like that speaks to that kind of that purpose, again, the purpose for the work that you do, right? And so if it is, working with hundreds of or thousands of clients just on a very superficial level and never really digging into it, I'm sure that can be great, but for me, it's not as fulfilling and doesn't tap into that need for making a deeper connection with the person kind of on a one-on-one basis. So I love that the work that we do incorporates both a group dynamic and then an individual one-on-one dynamic, because then we get the opportunity to dig in deeper. And I always enjoy, it's so interesting to me, and maybe partly because I am an introvert, to learn about what other people do and what the work they do. And I've worked with some clients on their VIP days that had some jobs that I would never, ever, even remotely, as hard as I tried, ever be qualified to do. And it took me, I actually would do homework just to understand what they do, because I like to understand it, and it's complicated stuff. So I just find that fascinating. And then it really makes me feel more connected to them, and like I'm better able to help them, which fulfills me, right? So it does, I don't need to be the expert on that, but I can learn about it and then help them look like the expert on it, right? So I just love that deeper feeling. And I think it is part of that introversion.
And that also brings to mind that as introverts, and I think this is what makes us great speakers and great leaders, is that we are very keen observers. I think that's part of the nature of being introverts. So we tend to be quieter in a sense. I think it's because we're observing a lot of what's going on around us and kind of processing it. And so to your point, when we work with our clients in that one-on-one VIP day, we spend 3.5 hours with them, just asking them questions, talking through ideas, kind of getting all their ideas in a coherent message for them. And we have to be really great listeners. In order to do that, we have to observe, we have to kind of step back and see the bigger idea of all the things that they're sharing with us. And then by extension, as speakers, when we're in front of an audience, whether it's an audience of 20 or 30 people, or even an audience of several hundred people, I feel like as introverts, we're good at observing the dynamics of the audience, the energy of the audience, kind of what's going on, what do they need, how do we need to adjust in the moment in order to serve the audience that we're in front of.
Yes, I agree with that. I wonder too, and I don't have any research to back this up, but I would be curious to know if most introverts have a lot of empathic ability, like pick up on, because I feel like I pick up on energy in the room. I pick up on just energy when I'm talking to a person. And I think that from an introvert standpoint, I think that's part of what can exhaust me as an introvert, is the fact that I'm picking up on things that other people may never even pick up on. So I'm picking up on so much more, and feels like a job, right? Sometimes it feels like a job because I have to be aware, like my spidey senses are always going off about not necessarily bad things, but just like everything, right? And so I'm picking up on interactions between other people that I'm not even part of, the energy of the room, the energy of the organizer, everything. And so, but I do think that makes for a really engaging speaker.
Yes. Oh, that is so true about just like we almost can't help it, but like our brains are constantly processing what is going on around us with the people that we're interacting with directly, but even just people all around. I remember when I was in fifth grade. So this was, last year of elementary school. And in our fifth grade classroom, we would have like 4 students to a big desk, right? We each have like our little desk with a little like drawer that we could put stuff in, right? I still can picture it in my mind. And I love school like you did, Diane, right? Like it was, this place where we felt like we could be ourselves, and it had that sense of, safety and curiosity and all of that. But I remember, so again, I love to read. I think introverts also like to read because it gives us that alone time. So during breaks between stuff, I would often be reading a book. No surprise. And of course I had friends and I would chat with them, but I probably really preferred the book. But one time my teacher, his name is Mr. Johnson, said to me, he's like, Carol, he's like, I can tell you know exactly what is going on with every single kid in this classroom. You know all the social dynamics. You know who is friends with who. You know everything because I can see how observant you are. And that has stuck with me to this day. And I think you do the same thing, Diane.
Oh, for sure. I have such sensitive intuition about people that, anytime in my life when I've met a new person or someone's introduced me to somebody, if I've picked up a weird vibe, I would say 99.9% of the time I am correct about whatever the vibe is that I get about a person. And so it's great. But again, it is also very exhausting because it's just constantly filtering, data coming in. So sometimes I'd like to turn that off.
Yeah, really. And then, again, think about not only as speakers, but as leaders. If you're leading a team within your own company, or a team, if you work for a company and you have a team that you're responsible for, or colleagues, think about as an introvert, you may not be the loudest person in the room or the rah person in the room, but you probably really understand those team members and what motivates them, or what they need in order to perform better, and really truly using those listening skills and observation skills to help them to do that. So Diane, you mentioned also earlier, which I thought was really fascinating about when we were talking about this, we prefer deep, meaningful conversations and content, whether it's presentations we're delivering, the work that we're doing with our clients. And then I think about social media and how much we don't enjoy social media. We use LinkedIn because it is very much a professional network whose algorithms do not prioritize extroversion. Let's say it that way. Think about Instagram Reels, TikTok, right? I think that's why those have never taken for us, why we don't sure, can I force myself to create content for it? Maybe for a week, but I probably wouldn't keep up with it because it truly doesn't feel authentic to me. And I've always wondered over the years, why can't I just do this? Why can't I just be like, quote, everyone else and just get this content done? But I can't. And I think maybe it's because we're introverts.
100% agree with that. It feels it's almost like for me trying to speak a different language. I don't know how to do it. And I am almost resistant to wanting to learn. I mean, I actually do want to learn another language, but learning how to do TikTok or learning, how to leverage Instagram, I'm like, it feels really inauthentic for me. It feels It just feels like I would have to be someone else. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to not be myself.
Yeah. So, for those of you listening, if you are also an introvert and you feel like us, where you've tried social media and it just doesn't feel right, give yourself permission that it may not be the right channel for you. And that is okay. We don't have to do what everyone says we're supposed to do or we think we're supposed to do. But if you enjoy public speaking, again, because it's like, even if you're an audience of 500 or 600 people, it still feels more intimate and more of a direct connection than an Instagram feed or a TikTok feed does. I mean, Diane, I've spoken to audiences of over 500. I know you have as well. And we can still do it. And it still feel much more connective than anything that we've put on social
Oh,
media?
it feels so intimate because I'm speaking to this huge group of mostly people that I don't know, and yet somehow I feel connected to them because, well, I guess because they're all looking at me. I'm up there and I'm speaking, and they're all looking at me, and I feel a responsibility to share something with them that's meaningful. They've given their time to me, and now I want to give something back to them, and it feels like an intimate exchange in that way. And I like that. The other thing is that speaking engagement is that one moment in time, whereas Instagram just keeps going and TikTok just keeps going, and you can never be up to date on anything because it's just constantly changing, right? But that the speaking engagement that you do is that one moment in time. That's the only time that happens. And sure, they might have a replay video or whatever, but everybody's there in that one moment together. That's what feels so intimate to me.
Oh, yes, that's a great point. This is also why I love podcasting
Yes.
and why I decided to start a podcast all those years ago, and why we both enjoy either interviewing people on this podcast or being guests on other podcasts, because number one, we're having a one-on-one conversation live and with the other person, but then also podcasting by its very nature is an intimate medium because you're just listening in your ears. You're not distracted by a whole lot of other
Oh
visuals.
yes, I love podcasting for that reason. I think, I think for any introverts who are listening, in addition to speaking, starting a podcast could be a really great way to get your message out because it is very intimate, and yet you as the introvert have the control over, what the message is, speak directly to your audience, directly in their ears, and it is very engaging.
And that's one of the tips that we have for you to develop your speaking skills as an introvert is definitely guest on podcasts. Consider hosting your own podcast. I have thought about it, Diane, through all of the group programs and the Thought Leader Academy we've run. We have probably midwifed, been godmothers to
Oh
maybe
my
10 podcasts
Yes.
that clients have started, with our encouragement. And like, we're not podcast producers, so we don't do the technical, they find the people for that. But we have definitely helped give them the inspiration and the support to go put themselves out there as podcast hosts. And I'm so
Oh,
proud
I
of
know.
them for
That's so
doing
nice
that.
to be connected to that idea. I love it.
So the other thing that to develop your speaking skills is to challenge yourself with different types of speaking. And this is not necessarily easy because once we master one type, we just want to, again, just be comfortable and stay there. If you really are comfortable with very prepared speaking, challenge yourself with more impromptu speaking. I did an episode all about impromptu speaking skills back in episode 390. So do that. Also, if you tend to do long presentations, like you like the hour or so, try experimenting with shorter presentations, vice versa. If you tend to like shorter, try longer or workshops. So get yourself a little bit out of the comfort zone to start practicing with these different types of speaking. The other thing to do is LinkedIn Lives. Now, that does incorporate video as well as obviously audio, but it's a great way to just get yourself over the hump of especially video content and invite someone to be on the LinkedIn Live with you. It's so much easier to have a conversation or interview them than to just sit there and stare at the camera by yourself.
Yes, 100% agree with that. I think the thing too that I like about LinkedIn Lives is that, and this speaks to how we kind of operate as introverts is, and I've always been like this, I would much rather be part of some small group get together versus I don't really enjoy large group events or get togethers socially because they just do feel so overwhelming for me. But if somebody is like, oh, meet me and a couple of my friends, yeah, I love to do that because it does feel more manageable for me from an energy standpoint and it's more intimate. And I think LinkedIn Lives are like that as well. It's like a little intimate presentation. And it's not like the TikTok and Instagram where you have to just do a ton of content No, you just create the one LinkedIn Live, or you do them once a week, once a month, whatever the frequency is, and you still get the ability to put content out there, but it's in a controlled way that can, fit with whatever your style is as an introvert. I like that.
Yeah, so do I. And this is why when our Thought Leader Academy clients are getting ready to graduate, we have them do a LinkedIn Live where we host it and then they deliver about 10 minutes of the signature talk that they worked on with us, because we want the number one to have a deadline to actually deliver part of the signature talk, but then also to give them the practice to be on something like a LinkedIn Live if they haven't had much experience with that either. So we've done some of those this year. You can scroll back in your podcast feed and find those. And then we have some coming up with our next batch of clients who are getting ready to graduate. So Diane, let's talk about some tips for attending events. You mentioned that larger events are not quite as appealing to you as smaller, more intimate events. I concur 100%. This is why when we do in-person retreats and workshops, we limit the number of women to about 10 to 12 because we like having that smaller group so that we all feel much more comfortable and we're not, have like 50 people one time. I mean, maybe we'll do an event with more people, but as far as like hands-on coaching, workshops, that kind of thing, I like the smaller numbers. Now, we've attended a lot of events this year, everything from, small, maybe 20 people, all the way up to probably 200 people. I've been to gala dinners, with like a whole ballroom full of people. I've been to smaller events. Diane, what about you? What have you found as far as what you've learned about yourself?
Yes. So I've been to a variety of types of events as well. And I think my favorite types are more the lunch and learn styles for some local group, where it's 60 women, maybe maximum of 100, but maybe like closer to 50, 60. And then I feel like it's easy to meet people and talk to them. What I find that happens in a much larger group, say a conference or like a large event with 600 people in attendance, is people tend to get in their own little cliques. And then for me personally, again, I grew up very shy and didn't have much growing up. And so my brain immediately reverts to teenage Diane, who was shy and felt like she didn't fit in. And then all of a sudden I feel like I don't have anybody to talk to. And I'm like, great, why did I come to this? Who am I going to talk to? Nobody wants to talk to me. This is immediately where nobody's thinking about me. This is what's processing in my head, right? But people do sort of start to group up in large groups like that. And it is very hard to break through and it's so much easier to walk up to one person at a table or two people at a table than to walk up to a group of 6 women who are chatting together. And it's really hard to kind of break in there and tell them who you are and why do you want to talk to them, right? So I much prefer lunch and learns, just any kind of luncheon like that, because they're usually limited in size. So those types of things or if a local woman says, oh, I'm forming this group and right now we have like 20 women, do you want to come to a meetup? Yes, I do want to come to that, because smaller group, I feel more comfortable. I can meet more people at a small group than I can at a conference.
Yes, I completely agree with you. It is hard to break in when like there's a group of 4, 5, 6 people all talking together. And that does tend to happen more at larger events. And so the other thing is that, you think about the larger events, and maybe this is also why larger events are harder for us, is that I feel like the agenda sometimes is a little bit fuzzier, whereas I like to know concrete, okay, like this, like the first half hour is networking, and then we're going to have a panel discussion or we're going to have the speaker. I feel like we like that structure better because then we know what's coming. And so I will probably show up 10 minutes left of the networking half an hour, and maybe not show up at the very beginning of the networking half hour.
Yeah, no, that's true. I do like a structure and then I like the structure because then I know, okay, here are some places where I can maybe start talking to some new people versus just being thrown into a sea full of people in a conference and like, I don't know what to do with this. It's very hard for me.
One thing that I did at conferences before the pandemic, when I would go to a lot of conferences, is that I would actually put together a lunch meetup with other women who I knew were attending that conference. So I attended some podcasting conferences. And so I knew a lot of other fellow women podcasters. So I would reach out to them, bring together like 8 or 10 of them. And so I would say, okay, on such and such a date, lunch at the conference is from 12 to 1. Here's the restaurant. Let's all meet. And then I had someone to have lunch with for sure. Like I was guaranteed because I was the one who was scheduling it.
I like that because it's also like taking the conference and breaking it down into a more manageable size for you. I like that.
Yes, and I loved doing those, and yeah, I will definitely continue to do that. So here are some things that you can do as an introvert when attending, especially conferences where maybe it's multiple days and it is a large number of people. Is connect with some people before the event.
Mhm.
So if you know anyone, or if somehow you can find on LinkedIn or other social media, follow hashtags, see who else is going, and say, hey, would you like to have lunch together on such and such a date, or bring together a few people? I think that would help a lot to kind of get over that feeling of, what am I going to do next? And then, Diane, you mentioned this, is that if there's someone who's by themselves, go up and talk to them. And I know you do that quite a bit.
Yes, part of the reason I do that is because I am an introvert, but also part of the reason is because I'm sometimes that one person standing there by herself, and I wish somebody would do that for me. And so I went to an event. It was a local event, but it was kind of on the large size because it was for a local chamber, and they were recognizing some prominent women in the community. So I would say there had to be at least 500 women there. So it's on the bigger side. And when I walked in, everybody was formed up into their little cliques in this very sort of she area. And, I knew that I was not going to make my inroads there, but I saw one young woman sitting on a little sort of bench sofa thing, just sitting there by herself. And so I kind of looked around. It's like, obviously, I'm not going to be able to talk to these other people. So I just went right up to her and I said, hi, you look like you're here by yourself, and I am too. Would you like to chat? And then I just sat down on the sofa next to her, and she said, oh, thank God. Yes, I would. And then she even said to me, I think she was more of an introvert as well, and said to me, gosh, it's really hard to kind of get in with these people. Like they're in all these cliques. I said, I know. And then we just talked about that. And then we had a lovely conversation. We sat together at the luncheon portion of it, had a lovely conversation. I went to a couple more things with her. So I've seen her a couple of times. That is a great way to meet people.
Yes, I love that idea, because not only are you doing them a favor, but hopefully your karma is good, and will come back to you
Yes,
at another
please.
event.
Oh, I hope so. I hope Taylor Swift's right about karma.
Yes. And for those of you who are extroverts and are still listening to this episode, thank you so much.
Yes.
You are wonderful. You're wonderful speakers and leaders as well. But if you see us
Please
little
come talk to
introverts
us.
by ourselves, please come talk to us.
Yes, please.
All right. So the other thing to do is at the conference, this is whether you're speaking or not, but definitely if you're speaking, make sure that you schedule in that recharge time, that alone time, whether it's in the morning or at the afternoon break or before the dinner festivities or whatever it is. Try not to go back to back to back, as tempting as it may seem, because you may be fine doing that for a day, but you probably will start feeling the consequences of that by the second or third day.
Oh, that is so true. Back in my corporate days, it was, when like it was just meeting after meeting after meeting after event after meeting after event, constantly all the time, 24/7. And as an introvert, it was not a good space for me to be in because it wore me out, and I'm not at my best. And I'm also, my patience would get very short because I was craving some time to just decompress from it all and couldn't get it. And so then I'm irritable and my energy's gone. And I'm like, well, now I'm useless to everybody, including myself. So I think that method of blocking off time to recharge is a smart thing to do.
And also block off time the day after you get
Yes.
back from a conference. So say the conference is like a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and normally you would have other Zoom appointments or other work on Thursday and Friday. I recommend blocking those
Agree.
off or just doing very minimal so that you have that time coming back, because weeks ahead of time, as you're looking at your calendar, you're like, oh, I'll be fine. I'll be back from the conference and I'll, put people in, but don't.
Yes.
Because you will be glad that you gave yourself that
Yes.
time. All right. So then for those of you who are interested in working with us, we do have our Thought Leader Academy, which is online. It's an 8-week program that combines weekly group Zoom calls plus a one-on-one virtual VIP day where we work with you to create your signature talk. Our enrollment dates are for the remaining of 2024. Can you believe it? We have one group that starts in August, and we have the next group that starts in October. And then that is it for 2024 until next year.
Thanks.
So if you want to get all the details about that, you can do so at speakingyourbrand.com/academy. We're also doing an in-person one-day workshop in Orlando, Florida on October 10th. And that will give you the opportunity to not only work with us on your talk, but then also to practice on our stage. And this is really where we see so many of our introverted clients come to life, because we, again, being those keen observers and being coaches and having done this for so long, we can instantly pick up where they are limiting themselves and where they need to break through, and what we need to do and encourage them and help them with their storytelling, especially so that they come more alive as speakers.
Yeah, I love that. The in-person workshop that we're going to do, and anytime we've done an in-person workshop like this, or like in the past, or this upcoming one, they're so great because we do also keep the size small, and they're great for introverts and extroverts. But how many times have we had clients at a retreat in person where it's clear that they're an introvert and they're struggling with movement on the stage and like how to come across and feeling uncomfortable, all things that we completely understand because we've been there, but they all come to life. And I think because it is a room full of accepting, welcoming, understanding women who get where you're coming from and are there to support you. And so it doesn't feel like this huge conference where you're just one of many, right? You feel cared for, nurtured, supported. So if you get a chance to attend this in-person workshop, I implore you to do that, because you're going to get so much out of it. And a lot of confidence is going to come from that.
And here's what I hear from the clients who've attended our other in-person workshops and retreats is that, and again, many of them are introverts, and they, after attending and after the practice time on our stage and our coaching and our feedback, then they go to their speaking engagements, and then they get feedback from the audience like charismatic. And they have said to me, Carol, I have never been called a charismatic speaker. And that's the difference that it makes. So you can get the details about this in-person workshop at speakingyourbrand.com/workshop. Again, that's speakingyourbrand.com/workshop. All right, Diane. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast to talk about why introverts do make great speakers and leaders. And we are proof, as are all of the amazing clients that we work with, whether they're introverts or extroverts. And so next week's episode, Diane interviewed one of our Thought Leader Academy graduates, Cindy Rowe, because she is on fire on the speaking circuit. We see her LinkedIn, and she is just booking gig after gig. And so Diane had a fantastic conversation with her that you're going to hear next week on the specific strategies she uses to get momentum on the speaking circuit. Get ready to take notes. And these are very practical, tangible things that you can do that maybe take an hour or two a week, and they're definitely doable. So Diane, thank you for having that conversation. I know our listeners are going to look forward to it. Don't forget to take our speaker archetype quiz so you can leverage your natural communication strengths and amplify them at speakingyourbrand.com/quiz. Until next time, thanks for listening.